The catastrophe didn't happen all at once. It arrived with the slow, crushing inevitability of a glacier calving into the sea. But if you had to pinpoint the exact second the ice cracked, it was 11:47 a.m., 17 minutes. That was all it took. 17 minutes into a questioning period that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar had fought for, demanded, and publicized as the moment she would expose the FBI's corruption. Instead, she sat frozen, her posture hunched forward, a cell phone pressed so hard against her ear that her knuckles were white. Her lawyer, a man who usually exuded the confidence of billable hours, was whispering urgently, his face a mask of panic. Across from her, FBI Director Kash Patel sat with his hands folded neatly on top of a red folder. His expression was calm, almost serene. It was the look of a man who had just laid down a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game and was simply waiting for the rest of the table to realize the game was already over. The House Oversight Committee hearing room, usually a cacophony of shuffling papers, whispering aides, and camera shutters, had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. It wasn't the polite silence of respectful attention. It was the frozen, suffocating silence of collective shock. 47 million people were watching live across every major network. C-SPAN's servers were buckling under the unprecedented load. Twitter had crashed twice in the last 10 minutes as the algorithm struggled to keep up with the volume of reactions. But none of that mattered in this frozen second. The only thing that mattered was the look on Ilhan Omar's face. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the prosecutor. She was supposed to be the one asking the hard questions, grilling Patel on national television about his alleged political witch hunts against progressive members of Congress. She had rehearsed the sound bites. She had prepared the clips for social media. Instead, she was the one who couldn't answer. To understand how we reached this precipice where a sitting congresswoman's career was imploding in real time, broadcast to the world, we need to rewind. Not far, just 17 minutes. Chairman Mike Johnson banged the gavel 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed through the ornate chamber, signaling the start of the hearing. "This hearing of the House Oversight Committee is now in session," Johnson announced, his voice grave. "We are here today to address concerns raised by several members regarding Federal Bureau of Investigation practices and allegations of politically motivated investigations targeting sitting members of Congress." He looked down at Kash Patel, seated alone at the witness table. There were no handlers flanking him, no public relations team whispering in his ear. It was just him, a leather portfolio, and a glass of water. "Director Patel, thank you for appearing voluntarily today." Kash adjusted his microphone, the feedback whining slightly before settling. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to answer any questions the committee has." His voice was steady, professional. It was the voice of someone who had been through 1,000 of these hearings and knew exactly how the theater of Washington worked. He knew the traps, and he knew how to avoid them. Ilhan Omar leaned into her own microphone. She was dressed for battle in a bold purple hijab and a tailored black suit. Her eyes were sharp, confident, scanning the notes prepared by her staffers. This was her moment. She had been preparing for weeks, telling her supporters that this would be the day the FBI was held accountable. "Director Patel?" Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "I'm going to get straight to it because the American people deserve straight answers." She paused for effect, letting the cameras find her face, ensuring the framing was perfect. Over the past 6 months, Multiple progressive members of Congress have reported being followed, having their communications monitored, and being subjected to what can only be described as harassment by federal law enforcement. This committee has received multiple whistleblower reports, credible reports, suggesting that the FBI is maintaining active surveillance operations on at least a dozen sitting members of Congress. The room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. This was the accusation they had come for. Omar's voice rose slightly, gathering momentum. These aren't random members, Director. They're progressives. They're Muslims. They're people of color. They are members who dare to speak truth to power, who criticize American foreign policy, who demand accountability from institutions like yours. She locked eyes with Kash Patel, her gaze unwavering. So, let me start with a simple question. A yes or no question. Is the FBI currently investigating any sitting member of Congress? The trap was set. If he said no, she would produce the whistleblower complaints and accuse him of lying. If he said yes, she would demand to know why he was targeting her allies. Kash didn't hesitate. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. Yes, Congresswoman. The reaction was instantaneous. The room erupted. There were audible gasps from the gallery. Photographers' cameras clicked like machine guns, a wall of mechanical noise. A Republican in the back row actually said, "Holy shit!" loud enough for the boom mic to catch it. Omar's lips curled into a slight triumphant smile. She had him. She had him right where she wanted him. An admission on live television that the FBI was investigating the legislative branch. And how many of those investigations target Muslim or progressive members? She pressed, ready to deliver the knockout blow. Some of the individuals under investigation identify as progressive, Kash said calmly, his demeanor unchanged by the chaos around him. Some identify as Muslim. But, Congresswoman, I need to clarify something important. Yes or no answers, Director? Omar cut him off, her voice sharp. She wasn't interested in nuance. This is exactly what we feared. Political persecution disguised as law enforcement. You are targeting members who speak truth to power, who criticize. Congresswoman. Kash's voice cut through her monologue like a scalpel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just firm. The kind of firm that stops a room cold. You asked for yes or no. I gave you yes, but context matters in law. May I provide it? Omar waved her hand dismissively, confident in her position. You can provide it after you answer my questions. Director, have you personally authorized surveillance on any member of this committee? Behind the scenes in the gallery, 3 rows back, Omar's lawyer had stopped taking notes. He was shaking his head frantically. No, no, no. His lips moved silently. Don't ask that. Don't open that door. But Omar didn't see him. She was riding high on her opening success, fueled by the adrenaline of the confrontation. She was so sure she was the prosecutor in this scenario. She didn't see that she had just walked into her own trial. Kash Patel took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked at the Congresswoman with an expression that was hard to read, part patience, part warning. Congresswoman, he began, I don't personally authorize individual surveillances. That is not the role of the director. However, I do review and approve investigation recommendations from field offices when they meet the probable cause standards established by federal law. He leaned forward slightly, his hands still clasped. So to answer your question, if a member of this committee is under investigation, it is because career FBI agents, not political appointees, not me, found evidence of potential federal crimes serious enough to warrant one. Omar scoffed. She actually scoffed. A derisive sound caught by her microphone and broadcast to 47 million viewers. Potential federal crimes, she mocked. That's a very convenient phrase, Director. It's a catch-all for anyone you disagree with. Care to elaborate on what crimes you are accusing sitting members of Congress of committing? The room got very quiet. Even the journalists stopped typing. The air pressure in the chamber seemed to drop. Kash looked at her for a long moment. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, calculating the blast radius of what was about to happen. When he spoke, his voice was measured, almost gentle. Congresswoman, are you sure you want me to answer that question in open session on live television? This was the warning, the last exit ramp, the final chance to turn back. Her lawyer was half out of his seat now, trying desperately to catch her eye, trying to signal the abort code. But Ilhan Omar's pride wouldn't let her back down. Not in front of the cameras, not with the whole progressive movement watching. She had come here to destroy Kash Patel's credibility, to paint him as a partisan hack. She couldn't show weakness now. Now, Director Patel, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, I asked you a direct question. What crimes are you accusing members of Congress of? Kash held her gaze for another beat. Then he nodded slowly, like a man who had just been given permission to do something he had been reluctant to do, but was now fully committed to executing. I haven't accused anyone, Congresswoman, he said, but since you are asking for specifics in an open session, he signaled to an aide standing by the wall, a young man holding a stack of files. Let's talk about the evidence. The aide moved quickly, efficiently, distributing sealed folders to every committee member on the dais. The folders were distinctive, bright red covers, official-looking, each one stamped with bold black ink, cleared for public session. OGC approved. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Members were frantically grabbing the folders, breaking the seals. Republicans' jaws dropped as they scanned the first page, their eyes widening in disbelief. Democrats were speed-reading, looking for the trap, looking for the spin, looking for a way to object. Omar's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her folder. Just slightly, but the high-definition C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, catching the tremor as she broke the seal. Kash waited patiently while they read. His hands remained folded on the table. His expression remained neutral. He looked like a professor waiting for his students to finish a pop quiz they hadn't studied for. What you are looking at, he said finally, his voice cutting through the rustling paper, are redacted summaries of 3 ongoing FBI investigations. These investigations involve campaign finance violations, wire fraud, and potential Foreign Agents Registration Act (FARA) violations involving current House members. He paused, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. These summaries have been cleared by the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel and the Office of Government Ethics specifically for this hearing, at your request for transparency. Omar looked up from her folder. Her eyes were wide, the confidence draining from her face like water from a cracked glass. This is highly irregular, she stammered, her voice losing its edge. You can't just distribute active investigation files to— Congresswoman! Kash's voice was sharp now, not angry, just precise, like a surgeon making an incision. You called this hearing. You demanded transparency about FBI investigations into members of Congress. You summoned me here to answer questions about those investigations. He gestured to the red folder in her hands. I am providing exactly the transparency you demanded. He paused again, letting the implications sink in. Or, he added, Would you prefer we discuss this in a closed session? I am happy to reconvene in a SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility. If you would like to stop, just say the word. She was trapped. Everyone watching knew it. If she demanded a closed session now, she would look like she was hiding something, like she was guilty. If she continued, she had no idea what was coming next. Her pride made the choice for her. I have nothing to hide, Director, she said. Though her voice was defensive now, the bravado from 5 minutes ago already evaporating into the ether. Let's continue right here, but I want to be clear. This seems like a coordinated attack on Congresswoman. May I ask you a question? Omar blinked, thrown off balance. This is my question time, Director. Of course, Kash said smoothly. Then, let me answer your original question more specifically. Kash opened his own red folder, turning the page with a deliberate, crisp sound. You asked what crimes we are investigating when it involves members of Congress. Let me start with Case File 2021 DC 4478. He looked down at the page, reading the numbers, then looked back up at her. It involves $2.7 million in campaign expenditures paid to a consulting firm owned by an individual with whom the candidate allegedly had an undisclosed personal relationship during the period of payment. The investigation began after a formal complaint filed by the National Legal and Policy Center in March 2020, alleging that campaign funds were used for personal expenses in violation of Federal Election Commission regulations and potentially constituting wire fraud under federal statute. The room had gone completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. Omar's face had gone pale, her makeup standing out in stark relief against her skin. Director, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you discussing my campaign? Kash looked at her with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the cold calculation of a chess player who just announced checkmate. Congresswoman, you asked what crimes we investigate when it involves sitting members of Congress. I am giving you a specific example. If the details sound familiar, that is because they are drawn from public FEC complaints, financial disclosures, and documents obtained through lawful investigative process. Republican Jim Jordan leaned into his microphone, sensing blood in the water. Director Patel, to clarify for the record, is Congresswoman Omar currently under FBI investigation? Kash didn't take his eyes off Omar. Congressman Jordan, I cannot confirm or deny the identity of specific subjects in ongoing investigations without DOJ approval. What I can say is that Case File 2021 DC 4478 involves a sitting House member representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Everyone in that room knew there was only one House member from Minnesota's 5th District, and she was sitting right there, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table, realizing that the hunter had just become the hunted. This is outrageous! Ilhan Omar's voice cracked, rising an octave as it echoed off the mahogany walls. The composure she had maintained for the cameras shattered. She gripped her microphone stand as if she could physically throttle the accusation hanging in the air. You are using this hearing to publicly smear me without any due process. This is a political hit job. Kash Patel's voice remained infuriatingly steady, a calm baritone cutting through her shrill protest. It was the contrast that was killing her. The more she raised her voice, the more reasonable he sounded. I am answering your questions, Congresswoman, he said simply. You asked for specifics. I am providing them. Would you like me to stop? The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on the room like a physical weight. Omar looked frantically at her lawyer. He was shaking his head, mouthing the word stop, but she couldn't. To stop now would be an admission. To stop would be to flee the battlefield she had chosen. Half the progressive movement was watching. CNN was watching. She took a breath, trying to gather the scattered remnants of her dignity. "Fine, Director," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. "Let's talk specifics. You mentioned campaign expenditures. Campaign spending is legal. Hiring consultants is legal. What exactly is the allegation here?" And that was when Kash Patel opened the red folder completely. "The allegation, Congresswoman, is that campaign funds were used for personal benefit." He looked down at his notes. "Specifically, that payments totaling $2.7 million to the E Street Group, a firm owned by Tim Minett, were not for legitimate campaign services, but rather were a mechanism to funnel donor money into a shared household. E Street Group provided digital strategy, fundraising, consulting, and travel logistics," Omar insisted, regurgitating the talking points her team had prepared months ago. "We looked at that," Patel said. "Now, I'm not a campaign finance expert, so I had our team do some comparative research. We looked at comparable campaigns with similar district sizes, similar demographics, and similar fundraising profiles." He pulled out a chart. "We looked at Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's campaign. Very active digital presence, national fundraising base, similar profile to yours. In the 2018 election cycle, her campaign paid their primary digital consulting firm $47,000 for the entire cycle." He let that number land. $47,000. In that same period, your campaign paid E Street Group $890,000. A murmur rippled through the gallery. "That is 19 times the industry standard, Congresswoman, for a district with half the population density of some others." So naturally, the FBI asked the question, what did E Street Group do to earn 19 times the going rate? Omar opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her lawyer again. He was scribbling furiously on a legal pad, but his face was pale. "We couldn't find documentation of services rendered that justified that volume," Patel continued. "Your FEC filings list the payments as digital consulting and travel expenses. Very vague. So we dug deeper." He pulled out another document, this one dense with numbers highlighted in bright yellow. "In April 2019, your campaign paid E Street Group $275,000 in a single month. That is $250,000 in 30 days. We traced where that money actually went," Patel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that forced the room to lean in. "E Street Group received the payment from your campaign on the 4th. They then made the following disbursements within 48 hours. $18,000 went to Sterling Crisis Communications. That's a real firm. They do crisis management. Legitimate expense." He looked up at her, his eyes locking onto hers. "But that is only $18,000 out of $275,000. Where did the other $257,000 go?" The silence was excruciating. Every camera lens in the room felt like it was zooming in on Omar's pores. "Let me help you," Patel said gently. "Our forensic accountants traced the wire transfers. $100,000 went to an LLC registered in Tim Minett's personal name, separate from the E Street Group entity. $75,000 went to a luxury travel company. The dates of the travel booked match Instagram posts from Mr. Minett's private account, showing a 3-week vacation to the Maldives." He paused for effect. "And $50,000 went to a residential real estate escrow company as a down payment on a townhouse in Georgetown." He pulled out a property record. A townhouse that, according to DC property records, is currently owned jointly by you and Tim Minot. You could have heard a pin drop in the hearing room. This wasn't abstract corruption anymore. This was a house. This was a vacation. This was cold, hard cash. So, let me ask you again, Congresswoman, Patel said. Were the $100,000 personal payment, the $75,000 Maldives vacation, and the $50,000 house down payment related to legitimate campaign activities? Omar's lawyer shot to his feet. Mr. Chairman, I need to confer with my client immediately. Sit down, Counselor, Chairman Johnson said firmly, banging the gavel once. Your client called this hearing. Director Patel is answering her questions. You may advise her, but you may not disrupt. The lawyer sank back into his chair, looking defeated. Omar looked at him desperately. He shook his head slightly. There was no good answer. Omar's voice was barely audible, a dry rasp. I would need to review those specific transactions with my legal team before I could comment. That's your right, Patel said. But, just to be clear for the record, you cannot currently explain where $257,000 in campaign funds went in April 2019, funds that were supposed to be used for your re-election, but instead appear to have funded a personal lifestyle. Not without reviewing the full documentation, she whispered. Patel nodded slowly, like a teacher acknowledging a student who had failed an exam. Thank you for that answer, Congresswoman, but I'm afraid the pattern doesn't stop there. You could see it on Ilhan Omar's face now, the dawning realization that this wasn't just about one bad month of spending. This was systematic. This was an autopsy of her entire public life, and Kash Patel had brought the scalpel. Let's talk about your tax returns, Patel said, reaching into his seemingly bottomless folder. Jerry Nadler, the Democratic ranking member, leaned forward, his face flushed. Mr. Chairman, I object. The director is now discussing personal tax information, which is protected under privacy laws. It's not personal when it involves potential federal crimes, Patel replied calmly, not even looking at Nadler. And Congresswoman Omar's federal tax returns from 2014 and 2015 are directly relevant to this investigation regarding perjury and fraud. He turned his attention back to Omar, who was now staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. In 2014, you filed your federal taxes jointly with Ahmed Hirsi, Patel stated. You checked the box for married filing jointly. You listed a residential address in Minneapolis. You claimed 3 dependents, standard stuff. He paused. But, according to Minnesota state marriage records, you were also legally married to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi during that exact same period. Omar's head snapped up. Her face went from pale to ashen gray. Your marriage to Mr. Elmi was registered with the state in 2009, Patel continued, reading from a certified document. It wasn't legally dissolved until 2017. So help me understand this, Congresswoman. How did you file joint federal tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi while you were legally married to Ahmed Elmi? It was a cultural marriage, Omar stammered, her voice shaking. It's complicated. The IRS doesn't understand our traditions. The IRS doesn't recognize complicated as a legal category, Patel said, his voice maddeningly calm. You are either married or you are not under federal law. And if you filed taxes claiming marriage to one person while legally married to another, that is perjury. That is making false statements to the federal government. That carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison. He held up a piece of paper. I am holding Minnesota State Marriage Certificate MC 2009-017854. Bride, Ilhan Abdullahi Omar. Groom, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Date, February 12, 2009. Official signature, witness signatures, state seal. This is a legal document. He set it down gently on the table. So, if this marriage certificate is legitimate, then your 2014 tax return filed jointly with a different man is fraudulent. If this marriage certificate is fraudulent, then we have a different problem. Which is it? Omar looked at her lawyer. He had stopped whispering. He was just sitting there staring at the ceiling, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the solar system. These allegations have been debunked, Omar said, desperate to find a lifeline. Local media looked into this years ago. They found nothing. Local media did reporting, Patel agreed. The FBI does investigations. There's a difference. We have subpoena power. We have forensic accountants. We have the ability to trace records that reporters can't see. Republican member James Comer jumped in. Director, is the IRS investigating this matter? The IRS Criminal Investigation Division opened a case in 2021, Patel confirmed. The FBI is assisting because there are related immigration concerns. Immigration, Comer pressed. Kash hesitated for just a moment. A theatrical pause to let the word hang in the air. Congressman, I probably shouldn't go into detail on that without DOJ sign-off, Patel said, feigning reluctance. But since Congresswoman Omar opened this door by calling this hearing, he looked at Omar. She was no longer breathing rhythmically. She was taking short, shallow gasps. Our investigation found that Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi applied for U.S. permanent residency status, a green card, in 2011. On his application, he listed Ilhan Omar as his spouse. The marriage certificate I just referenced was submitted as the primary supporting documentation. His application was approved. Patel let that sit for a moment. The concern, and I want to be clear, this is still under investigation, is that if you married Mr. Elmi solely to assist with his immigration status while maintaining a concurrent relationship and family life with Ahmed Hirsi, that would constitute immigration marriage fraud. That is a lie, Omar shouted. I married him for love. It didn't work out. We interviewed 12 witnesses, Patel said, cutting her off with data. People who knew you during the 2009 to 2017 period. Friends, neighbors, family members. He looked at a summary sheet. 11 of them stated under oath that you never cohabitated with Ahmed Elmi as spouses. 8 of them stated that you maintained a romantic relationship and lived with Ahmed Hirsi throughout the entire period of your legal marriage to Elmi. And 3 of them, Patel said, his voice dropping, stated that you explicitly told them the marriage was an arrangement to help Elmi get his papers. Omar sat frozen. She looked like a statue of herself, perfectly still, except for the trembling of her hands. Now, Congresswoman, I'm not here to make accusations, Patel said, closing the tax folder. I'm here to answer your question. What crimes does the FBI investigate when it involves sitting members of Congress? The answer is the same crimes we investigate for anyone else. Tax fraud, immigration fraud, campaign finance fraud. We don't care if you're a congresswoman or a convenience store clerk. The law applies equally. But Kash Patel wasn't done. He reached for one final folder. This one was thinner, marked with a different color tape. There is one more area I need to address, he said, and this one required specific additional declassification clearance from the Department of Justice, which I received this morning at 8 a.m. The room was already reeling from the marriage fraud allegations, but Kash Patel didn't give the audience time to breathe. Ilhan Omar watched him open the folder. Her hands were no longer shaking. They were gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles looked like polished bone. The fight had drained out of her. She looked less like a congresswoman and more like a passenger on a plane that had just lost its engines. In October 2017, Patel began, consulting a document stamped "Secret, No Foreign" that had been heavily redacted for the public session. You traveled to Istanbul, Turkey. While there, you met with officials from the Qatari government, specifically representatives from the Qatari Embassy and the Qatar Foundation. Omar's eyes widened slightly. This was the one thread she thought was safe. This was foreign policy, the realm of diplomacy, not domestic campaign finance. "I meet with foreign officials all the time," she interjected, her voice sounding thin and reedy. "That is part of my job as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It is routine diplomacy." "Absolutely correct," Patel agreed, nodding. "Members of Congress meet with foreign officials regularly. That is normal. That is appropriate. But here is what caught the FBI's attention." He flipped a page. "Within 6 months of those meetings in Istanbul, you became very publicly critical of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. You introduced legislation to block arms sales. You tweeted constantly about their human rights records, which again is your right as a legislator. But you were notably silent on Qatar's human rights record. Despite Qatar having many of the same labor issues, the same restrictions on speech, the same lack of democratic process as its neighbors, you said nothing. In fact, you praised their role as a mediator in the region." "I speak out where I think it is appropriate," Omar argued, trying to regain her footing. "My policy positions are based on moral clarity, not—" "Then explain this." Patel cut her off, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. "In 2018, 2019, and 2020, your campaign and your leadership PAC received a combined $187,000 in donations from individuals and entities with documented business ties to Qatari state interests." He pointed to the list. "Donors with direct contractual business relationships with Qatar Airways. Executives from subsidiaries of the Qatar Foundation. Lobbyists registered to represent the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund." Omar was flipping frantically through her folder, staring at the list of names. She knew them. She had shaken their hands at fundraisers. She had cashed their checks. "Now, receiving donations is legal," Patel continued, his voice tightening. "Meeting with foreign officials is legal. Having policy positions favorable to certain countries is legal. But there is a law called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA." He leaned forward. "FARA requires anyone who acts as an agent of a foreign government, anyone who advocates for their interests in the United States in exchange for compensation, to register with the Department of Justice." "I am not a foreign agent," Omar snapped. "I am a United States Congresswoman. The suggestion is offensive." "The two are not mutually exclusive, Congresswoman," Patel said calmly. "If you advocated for specific policy positions favorable to Qatar in exchange for financial support, either to your campaign or to affiliated organizations, that requires FARA registration." "I never received any personal payments from a foreign government," she insisted. "That is a conspiracy theory." "I didn't say personal payments," Patel corrected her. "I said campaign donations and support for affiliated organizations. The law covers both. If the money was a quid pro quo for the policy stance, it is a crime." He watched her carefully. She was cornered, but she was still fighting. "You say there is no connection," Patel said. "You say it is a coincidence that the money flowed in right after the policy positions changed. But the FBI doesn't rely on coincidences. We rely on evidence." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, placing it face down on the table. "The FBI obtained through a lawfully executed warrant, approved by a federal judge, WhatsApp messages between you and an intermediary. The intermediary's name is redacted in your folder to protect an ongoing counterintelligence operation. But I can tell you this. He is a Qatari national with direct ties to the Amiri Diwan, the royal court of Qatar. The color drained from Omar's face so completely she looked like a ghost. The mention of WhatsApp sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. In Washington, D.C., WhatsApp is the currency of the clandestine, the app used when you don't want a record, or so people think. I can't read the messages verbatim without additional DOJ clearance, Patel said, tapping the folder. But I can summarize the content for this committee. The messages discuss, and I quote the classified summary, compensation for advocacy on Gulf policy issues and ensuring favorable congressional stance on the upcoming Qatar sanctions vote. Patel looked up. Congresswoman, would you like to explain to this committee what the phrase compensation for advocacy means in this context? The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Omar. The cameras were zoomed in so tight you could see the sweat beading on her forehead. She turned to her lawyer, whispering frantically. He whispered back, his face grim. She shook her head violently. He grabbed her arm, whispering more urgently. Finally, she turned back to the microphone. Her voice was trembling. I need to see the actual messages before I can respond to this. You are summarizing out of context. They are in your folder, Patel repeated. Page 47. The relevant passages are highlighted in yellow. Omar flipped to page 47. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper made a rattling sound that the microphone picked up. She stared at the page. The silence stretched on. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It was an eternity in television time. The entire country watched a sitting congresswoman read the evidence of her own compromise. Her face went from ashen to white. Her eyes stopped moving. She had reached the line. Chairman Johnson leaned into his microphone. Congresswoman Omar, do you need a moment to consult with your attorney? She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the page, reading the words she thought had disappeared into the digital ether years ago. Congresswoman? Johnson asked again. Her voice was barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. I need to consult with my attorney. That is your right, Patel said. His voice was almost gentle now, the voice of a man offering a blindfold before the firing squad. But I need to ask for the record, given the nature of these documents and the criminal statutes involved. He paused. Are you invoking your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination regarding the questions about potential FARA violations and your relationship with the Qatari government? And there it was, the moment. It was 11:47 a.m. The frozen second where everything collapsed. Every person in that room knew what pleading the Fifth meant. Legally, it was a constitutional protection, but politically, in a hearing you called, it was an unconditional surrender. It was an admission that the truth would send you to prison. Omar looked at her lawyer one last time. He nodded reluctantly. She took a shaky breath, closing the red folder. On advice of counsel, she said, her voice small and defeated, regarding the questions about the Qatar meetings and the FARA allegations, yes, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment rights. The room exploded. It wasn't just noise, it was bedlam. Journalists were sprinting for the doors. Republicans were shouting, "She's pleading the Fifth." Democrats were calling for an immediate recess. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Twitter servers buckled. Chairman Johnson banged his gavel so hard it sounded like gunshots. Order! Order! But there was no order. This was chaos. Kash Patel sat quietly at the witness table. He closed his red folder. He folded his hands. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. When the room finally quieted enough, he leaned into the microphone one last time. "Congresswoman, I want to be clear. Invoking your Fifth Amendment rights is completely legal and proper. But I need to inform you as a courtesy, the Department of Justice has been monitoring this hearing. They will likely request an expedited review of all aspects of Case File 2021 DC 4478. He sat back. The hearing was over. Everyone knew it. Chairman Johnson made the only decision he could. This hearing is in recess, pending consultation with committee counsel. We will reconvene at a time to be determined. The gavel fell, and with it, the political life of Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar didn't linger. The moment Chairman Johnson declared the recess, she was moving. A phalanx of staffers and lawyers instantly formed a human shield around her. They moved with desperate energy. "Move! Move! Make a hole!" a senior aide shouted. They burst out of the double doors, ignoring the wall of reporters. Microphones were thrust into the scrum like spears. "Congresswoman, did you take money from Qatar? Are you resigning?" Omar didn't look up. She didn't say a word. The group sprinted toward the elevators. Down in the underground parking garage, a black SUV was already running. She dove into the back seat. Tires screeched as the vehicle sped toward the exit ramp. But escape was an illusion. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere. 11:47 a.m. became legendary. The split second where Kash Patel mentioned the WhatsApp messages and Omar's face crumbled. By 1:00 p.m., #Omar indictment was the #1 trending topic worldwide. CNN broke into regular programming with an urgent red graphic. Ilhan Omar invokes Fifth Amendment rights. Fox News was more direct. Omar pleads the Fifth. Even MSNBC couldn't spin it. Their legal analyst said, "You simply cannot plead the Fifth regarding foreign payments and expect to stay on the Foreign Affairs Committee." By 3:00 p.m., Omar's office released a statement. Today's hearing was a politically motivated ambush. Director Patel's tactics were shameful. But the statement landed with a dull thud. She had demanded the hearing. She had asked for transparency. The silence from her own party was deafening. Reporters chased Nancy Pelosi through the hallways. "The Speaker believes all members deserve due process," her aide told the press, keeping Pelosi moving. The Congressional Progressive Caucus put out a statement. "We believe in the presumption of innocence." Not a single mention of Omar by name. The squad fractured in real time. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted once, "Due process matters for everyone." That was it. No fire emojis, just safe words. On day 2, the Washington Post dropped a bombshell. The case against Omar. The article neutrally laid out the timeline Patel had presented. The E Street Group payments, the marriage certificates, the Qatar records. The New York Times painted Omar as a politician who had committed the cardinal sin of Washington, arrogance. But the real strike came from the Senate. Chris Coons, Mark Warner, and John Tester, moderate Democrats facing tough re-elections, leaked that Omar should step aside. They wanted distance. By day 3, the institutional gears began to grind. Sensing weakness, Republican leadership moved to remove Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee. The atmosphere on the House floor was funereal. There were no passionate speeches defending her. The final tally flashed, 312 to 119. Ilhan Omar was removed. 67 Democrats had voted yes. It was a vote of no confidence from her own family. She left the chamber with her head down. 3 weeks after the vote, the final blow arrived. The Attorney General announced a 51-count indictment, 12 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of false statements to the FEC, 11 counts of filing false tax returns, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit immigration fraud, and 4 counts of FARA violations. The trial is tentatively set for September, the AG concluded. The career ended the moment the indictment hit the wires. In Minnesota, a primary challenger emerged, a moderate Democrat backed by a massive coalition. Polling showed Omar down 23 points. Her inner circle collapsed. Her campaign treasurer cut an immunity deal. Tim Minot hired his own legal team separate from Omar's. Kash Patel simply went back to work. He hadn't destroyed her career. She had done that herself. He had just held up the mirror. A senior staffer later told a journalist, Kash knew she would demand transparency. And he knew that if you demand transparency, you better be ready to receive it. She brought a narrative to a gunfight. He brought the documents.